Hello, welcome to Baltic World, the premier channel discussing news and important issues facing Northern, Central and Eastern Europe. My name is Crispin, and today I've got an update for you on the deepening crisis on the Belarus-EU border. What an update it is with Poland, Lithuania and Latvia. Before I jump into it, a big thank you. Some people have already signed up as patrons for this channel. We only just launched it in the last week in review. If you would like to support the channel, we have a Patreon account. We're trying to build up the amount of content to hopefully release videos every single day. So if you'd like to see that, do consider subscribing on Patreon. If you're not in a position to do that, that is perfectly fine too. We love making content, so just like and subscribe and consider sharing the video because it helps grow the channel a ton. Okay, so on this border, I spoke to Dr. Wojciech Lorenz of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Now, I won't quote him directly because I was speaking to him with a different reporter's hat on, but it was a fascinating discussion full of insights. And I asked him what he thinks Lukashenko's endgame is. What does success look like? And Lorenz pointed to several important things. One, de facto recognition for his regime. Since the stolen elections last year, no Western leader has spoken to Mr. Lukashenko, dealt with him on the international stage or invited him to international events. He's been frozen out of the community of nations, particularly within Europe. Secondly, he wants sanctions relief, of course, because the European Union has been crippling the economy of Belarus, trying to force a movement towards democracy and engagement with the legitimate opposition there. And thirdly, taking revenge on those that have given harbour to that opposition. Lithuania, of course, is hosting the government in exile led by Sviatlana Tikhanovskaya. Lukashenko feels personally aggrieved by that and is seeking to hurt Lithuania and others who are being active in trying to see democratic change in Belarus. Now, on recognition, as I said, partial success for Lukashenko. He has got 2 phone calls, I believe, so far with Angela Merkel. Now, it's only a partial success because Angela Merkel did not refer to him as president or give him any honorifics. It was just Mr. Lukashenko, as I understand it. And secondly, of course, Angela Merkel's an outgoing chancellor. She cannot invite him, even if she wanted to future events, future meetings of the Europeans and so forth. And so it is basically a token note that Lukashenko is someone who has to be reckoned with. He does have the power to spoil things for the European Union. He is currently destabilizing the European Union and flooding them with migrants and creating a regional crisis there. So Lukashenko has achieved at least a de facto recognition saying that, okay, we don't recognize his government as a legitimate government, but it does control territory, it does have a population, it does have the components of a government in terms of nation state, and therefore we have to contend with it on matters of our own interest because Lukashenko has the ability to cause us significant headaches and harm. So on that score, Lukashenko has succeeded. So partial success for Lukashenko on recognition, but definitely not complete success. On sanctions relief, this is where things get crazy. Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia said that the Europeans should pay Lukashenko off just as the Europeans paid off President Erdogan of Turkey. Now, this gets into the kind of Machiavellian plot, if you like, because unfortunately, you'll recall last year, Erdogan threatened to flood Europe with 3.6 million migrants from the Middle East. This was during the Greek migrant crisis. And the Europeans, much to my chagrin at the time, did pay Erdogan off, paid him 6 billion euros ostensibly to look after these migrants, no doubt most of it going into his personal pocket. And now he is double dipping. He is taking the money to support the migrants, then putting them on a plane from Istanbul to Minsk and dumping them in Europe anyway. So he's taken the money and gotten rid of his migrant problem, or is seeking to do that. And then the people that have already been paid for by the European taxpayer are now trying to enter the EU via Belarus, and Russia has the audacity and the gall to say that the EU should pay over again, this time to Lukashenko to host them there in Belarus. It's absolutely insane. Of course, if Lukashenko got that money, then these people would just hop over somewhere else, some other area of the border of the EU that's unfriendly to the EU, and the whole thing would continue down the line. The Europeans would be pressured to give money to Morocco or whatever. So it's absolutely insane, and shows just how unfriendly Erdogan is being to the European Union. This is a absolute outrage. Now, to the credit of some of the third-party airlines I mentioned in the last video, they have been pressured to stop sending people to Belarus. So Turkish Airlines, other sort of third-party airlines have pledged that to not transport any more migrants from the Middle East, from Iraq or Syria, via third countries to Belarus. Belarus will have to import them directly via Belarus Airlines or through Russian Aeroflot going forward. So that is a step in the right direction. Clearly, they saw the writing on the wall. They don't want to be frozen out of European airspace. That was very likely to happen, and that is a step in the right direction. Although, the numbers are continuing to grow, people are still getting pushed to the border. They're still being isolated there. And so that leads to the question of revenge. Well, of course, Lukashenko feels personally aggrieved and attacked that the Europeans have turned against him. Of course, Lukashenko has been in power since 1994. Other than the Vatican, he is the last true dictator in all of Europe. He is seeking to secure his legacy, and he's feeling incredibly bitter that the Europeans no longer acknowledge him as president, even though he clearly stole the election. Now, he's already been participating in acts of revenge in all kinds of ways. The Astravets nuclear power plant, which is only 16 kilometers from the Lithuanian border, is one of those issues. Now, remember, that got sort of some international support before this migrant crisis. But now that we're seeing the securitization of that border, I think it would be highly improbable for such a site to receive any approval today, even though, as you would note from a previous video, the whole thing violates the Espoo Convention because other European countries, including Lithuania, were not consulted on where that power plant was going to be located. But now we are seeing borders going up, thousands of police, military personnel, border guards being placed in that area, Sentinel-type drones, things that are keeping a watch over that entire area. It's very difficult now for members of the Belarus opposition to flee across the border into the EU because there has been an exclusion zone put up. So in one sense, yes, the securitization of the border is helping to preserve the integrity of EU borders. It is also hampering the ability of those seeking to effect democratic change within Belarus from accessing outside support. So in some ways, the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, in order to preserve the security and integrity of their own territory, are doing some of Lukashenko's work for them because it's going to be difficult to maintain a corridor of support for those that are opposition figures fleeing the persecution of the regime. Those persecutions have been continuing during the migrant crisis. Now, with Lukashenko's weaponization of migrants, tragically, there has already been a human cost. First of all, a Polish soldier was tragically killed in an accidental shooting involving a Polish firearm. We are informed that this was a sort of a tragic military accident while he was patrolling the Belarusian border. There was also a 19-year-old Syrian migrant who drowned in a river trying to swim to Poland. And also on the Russian side, the Russian military has been demonstrating support for the Lukashenko regime. There were joint paratrooper exercises. Two of the Russian paratroopers got caught up in a gust of wind. They got entangled and unfortunately for them plummeted to their deaths. So these things are worsening. And of course, now we have the weather. We are fast approaching the unforgiving, freezing Baltic winter. People who are totally unfamiliar and ill-equipped to deal with those kinds of temperatures. And this leads to the deepening crisis as the humanitarian situation worsens. Internal cohesion within the European Union will begin to fracture as scenes of human misery get worse and worse. As Dr. Lorenz observed, the countries realize in the European Union that the credibility of that organization is at stake. And that's why, to this point, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia have enjoyed some support. But even members of the European Commission one in particular said, look, they don't want pushbacks to be normalized. They're concerned about the laws in Poland and Lithuania authorizing people to push people to the Belarusian side of the border, make sure that their borders are protected, and therefore are looking to tweak this legislation. I think this is highly improbable that Poland and Lithuania will agree to any of that. And at the moment, I think the majority of the European Commission will continue to support these countries because they recognize, albeit grudgingly, that these efforts are securing not only Poland and Lithuania, but other countries as well, such as Germany, where many of these migrants intend to head. And then there is the issue of the militarization of this crisis. So as I mentioned before, there was the paratrooper drills with Belarus. Well, there has been 90,000 Russian troops amassing in a place called Yelna near the Belarusian border. Now, media reports talk about the amassing near Ukraine. It is actually much closer to Belarus. In March of last year, there was 100,000 troops amassing near Ukraine, and there was deep fears in that time that there would be a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine rather than just support for dissident movements and separatist movements that Russia's obviously already interfering with. But they thought there might be a full-scale invasion. Well, that did not occur. Now there is a significant military build-up near Belarus, no doubt sending a signal that Russian support for Lukashenko's regime is serious. Now, how far that support extends remains an open question because Lukashenko is not Putin's most favored friend, right? Lukashenko has long been a thorn in the side of the Russian leadership. It's just that he is considered to be the best of a bad bunch of options from the Kremlin's point of view. They will not support Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who's getting a lot of support from the West. They are deeply fearful for another colored revolution like they saw in Ukraine, and I have no doubt at all that Russian military intervention would be guaranteed if Vladimir Putin thought that was necessary to prevent such a revolution. They will not tolerate Belarus joining the EU or NATO. Now, the opposition themselves has been very careful in their terminology about this. They have not, said, look, we want to join the EU or NATO or anything like that. They're just saying, look, we want free and fair elections. We want the right to choose our leaders for ourselves. We don't want repression and violence against those that speak out in favor of democratic processes, or Lukashenko's climate of fear through the KGB and repression against his own people. So the opposition has been careful in its wording, but even if Lukashenko was to go, the Russians would look for another puppet. They wouldn't, welcome Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. I don't think, any concession she offered would be enough for their support at this point. So absent an alternative, the Kremlin will continue to support Lukashenko, although he has gotten up Putin's nose recently by threatening gas supplies to Europe. Russia has steadfastly said that they will not use gas supplies against Europe as a geopolitical tool. Now, if you fully believe that, I have a bridge to sell you, but they will want to maintain the appearance that that is true. There is one benefit for this threat, though, for Lukashenko, as long as he doesn't carry it out, which is that you'll recall the Nord Stream 2 pipeline connecting Russia to Germany under the Baltic Sea. This is bitterly opposed by the United States. The Germans have managed to resist Washington's pressure to cancel the project. Well, this only lends credence to getting that operationalized as soon as possible, because that, of course, gets around Belarus entirely. Any of Lukashenko's histrionic threats will not impact the gas supplies running through Nord Stream 2. And some Europeans will say that this actually secures European gas supplies because it doesn't require third-party countries unfriendly to the European Union, and they can point to Lukashenko's threats to cut off gas as an example. Now, I don't know how serious Lukashenko is about that. Putin was told about that by Russian press. He seemed genuinely surprised to hear it. He did say that that would violate Russian contracts with Europe. He would not want to see that happen, and that he would speak to Lukashenko about it. In other words, seeking to rein him in a little bit. Okay, so what's next? Well, as I said, the deepening humanitarian crisis will really turn the stomach of people in the European Union who have long prided themselves on being the humanitarian evangelists of the world. And therefore, there'll be a question mark over just how much human misery they can tolerate as winter sets in. Lukashenko, of course, doesn't care about these people, and unless he is paid off by the European Union, is highly unlikely to do anything about it. Then there is the question of the Russian support militarily for to Belarus, the Polish Prime Minister has been meeting with his counterparts in Lithuania and Latvia, questioning and discussing whether or not to invoke Article 4 of the NATO Charter. Now, this would be an escalation from a military point of view of the crisis. It would demand support be given to Poland and others by the rest of the NATO countries in dealing with the migrant crisis. Article 4 is the step below kind of collective defense. It's to say that the territorial integrity of one of the member states is being undermined and that there must be consultations between the NATO partners in order to resist the common aggression. Now, Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, has come out and blamed Lukashenko for this weaponization of migrants against the NATO countries, saying that, look, this is going to create a humanitarian catastrophe and Lukashenko is responsible. So he has said positive things about this. It's really up to the member states, though, to invoke the articles, and it remains to be seen whether they'll do that. Dr. Lorenz spoke to me about this, and he said that this really depends on whether the calculation of the benefit outweighs the risk, i.e. the benefit of getting military support to secure the border even further outweighs the risk that there'll be a sort of tit-for-tat escalation with Belarus and Russia, and it remains to be seen what happens there. I'll definitely, of course, keep you updated in that regard. In terms of where this crisis ends, well, at the moment, I think Poland and Lithuania and Latvia, their resolve is strong. I doubt they're going to cave into pressure, even if common attitudes in Western Europe turn. I think they're dead serious about protecting their territorial integrity, and a good thing too, that protects all of Europe. I don't think Lukashenko is going to get paid off the way Erdogan was. I hope that's the case. I think the Europeans have learned their lesson in that regard. So then it really comes down to how far Lukashenko is willing to push this. If he realizes that there's an increasing number of migrants on his own borders within his territory that he has to deal with, he might just take the win of dealing with Angela Merkel, take some sort of tokenistic benefits from the EU and claim victory. That might be the outcome. Alternately, increasingly desperate migrants, facing freezing and starvation and hypothermia, may do increasingly violent acts. And we've already seen that on the border. A couple of days ago, 7 Polish police officers were injured, a couple severely, when rocks and bottles and projectiles were hurled at them. The Polish government responded with tear gas and water cannons to disperse the violent crowd. But if these people, got their hands on some real weapons, if the numbers increased and the desperation was such, they could storm the barricades and create an even greater humanitarian crisis. Like, let's say that the Polish migrants, were properly armed and then they stormed across the barrier. At what point would the Poles or the Lithuanians need to use lethal force to defend themselves? So this would create obviously a deepening humanitarian crisis, noting that the majority of the migrants are young men of kind of fighting age. Yes, there are, women and children, but they are a small minority. A lot of these people are physically aggressive and desperate. So they will resort to increasingly, serious means to cross into the European Union, and Lukashenko may seek to support that. Conversely, the migrants themselves may simply give up. I mean, I know a number of them have, gone away from the border, seeking to return to their home countries, rather than face the frost of the Belarusian winter. And then that's a question of whether or not the European Union can see that out. Now, Dr. Lorenz points out, as I mentioned, that the credibility of the EU is at stake. If they don't stiffen their resolve and rally behind the Poles and Lithuanians, then this could seriously undermine cohesion of the European Union long term, and that is no doubt in Russia's national security interest. So Russia will be supporting Lukashenko's efforts and perhaps directing them in some ways in order to maximize the geopolitical benefit yielded from this crisis. And that's my view. That's my update to date. I will definitely continue following this story as developments emerge. If you found value in this discussion, as I said earlier, please like and subscribe. Consider sharing this video. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.